Jeff Ishee is an award-winning journalist with a career in radio, television, and print media. He is passionate about gardening, genealogy, American history, and growing heirloom peanuts. Is that your party trick? Guess, guess something, a random fact about me. He served in the U.S. Navy aboard 3 ships of the Atlantic Fleet. Jeff is married to Carole Marshall Ishee and lives in the Shenandoah Valley, the most beautiful place. Please welcome Jeff Ishee.
Thank you, Penny, very much.
Let me return this.
And let me thank you on behalf of all the folks watching and the people in this room for everything that your staff does. You obviously love history. You're aficionados of history, and it is greatly appreciated, everything that you do. So thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, great crowd here tonight, and I see some familiar faces in the audience, and I feel like I'm amongst home folks tonight because I think we all like history, specifically Virginia history, specifically Shenandoah Valley history, and family history. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm not here to sell books. I'm not. I want to talk about my journey that caused me to write a couple of books about my own family, and I hope that you can relate to your own family and maybe inspire you and some of the viewers on YouTube to do the same thing, to record those things that you think are important for the next generation, because if you don't do it, those things will pass away. I've been told it's always great to start off a speech with a joke, and I have to confess, I don't know any jokes. I'm a terrible joke teller. I am a terrible joke teller. But one thing that I am familiar with, and I'm going to presume that all I do is, there we go, I tell pearls of wisdom on the radio. That started a little over 30 years ago here at WSVA in Harrisonburg. Jim Britt and I were on the air one morning, and after my farm report one morning, he asked me, well, how about a pearl of wisdom? And I said, well, what is that? He said, just, a one-liner, something maybe an old coach told you, or a high school teacher, or maybe something your grandmother told you. And so that's a pearl of wisdom. And so we put out a request on the radio, if you have a pearl of wisdom, send them in. Thousands of pearls of wisdom came in from all around the WSVA listening area, West Virginia. And then we got on the internet, and now we're online streaming. They come in from all over the place, but most of them are from right here in Rockingham County. One of my favorite pearls of wisdom comes from Jim Bishop, who passed away about 3 years ago. A lot of you probably know Jim. Jim was a very funny man. He was a very intelligent man, a witty man. And he said that I want my kids to grow up and have everything that I couldn't afford. And then I want to move in with them. I said, how true is that? God bless you, Jim Bishop. He was the public information officer at Eastern Mennonite University. He was involved in so many things with the Chamber of Commerce, and he had his own radio show. He did a lot of things. So God bless you, Jim Bishop. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about weaving a story to tell your family's history. So many of us, we get onto Ancestry, we get onto Family Search, and we start a family tree, and we're really excited when all of a sudden we've got 30 people in the family tree, and we've got all these records of birth certificates and death certificates and marriage certificates and maybe high school diplomas. You got all this data, but there's no story there. And my wife has inspired me, Carole, who is right over here. She inspired me many years ago. Jeff, you've done all this work. You have over 3,000 people in the family tree now, but there's no story. So I started thinking, well, it would be nice to have a story that was factual that I could pass on to the grandkids. So that ultimately inspired me to write these two books. Two Sacks came out 2 years ago, December the 1st, and Magnolia Frontier came out 2 weeks ago when it was first published. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these books, and then I'm going to talk more about how you can tell your own family story. Every family, I think, has a legend. This is oral history. This is things that are passed on to you from your grandparents and so forth. And the family legend of the Ishee family was that there were 3 brothers that left Germany. They came to the United States. The 3 brothers were named John, Jacob, and Fred. And their last name, we spell it today as Ishee, but they spelled it a myriad of ways, including Ische, Ishi, Eschhe. I mean, just go on down the line there, issue. So there was one military record I found from the War of 1812. They had 3 different spellings of the last name of the same guy. So it was a little confusing, but the family legend was that there was John, Jacob, and Fred, and John and Jacob settled in Mississippi, but Fred, who was the youngest brother, he went off to Ohio and was never heard from again. Now that was the legend. And it turned out to be mostly true, but there was no factual data there. That's all I knew about. Growing up, that's what my dad told me, my grandfather, my aunts and uncles. And then I got into the family history. I was sitting in my lazy boy where we live in Mount Sydney, Virginia. This has been about 15 or 16 years ago now. And I would spend evenings on Ancestry and Family Search just looking for old documents. And it was my dream that I could find John, Jacob, and Fred with the last name that was anything resembling Isze or all the various spellings. And I about came out of my lazy boy chair when I found this. This is an actual ship's passenger list from October the 9th of 1803. The ship Commerce entered the harbor at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They had just over 200 passengers on board. And I was just kind of going down the list, just scanning through the pages. And here I find John, Ische. And then I find right below him, Hans Jacob, Ische. 2 lines down, there's Fred. I found him. I was literally so excited. I came up, I levitated out of my lazy boy. I found him, but then it hit me, wait a minute. It's not just 3 guys. There's a whole group here. It started with passenger number 81, Ulrich Ishee, Barbara, his wife. Then there was John, there was Hans Jacob, Maria, Frederick, Barbara, Hans Ulrich, and Elizabeth, his wife. There's 9 people in this group. Nobody ever told me this. There was only supposed to be 3 brothers. So I had to figure out, well, what are their relationships? Is this one family? Is this a couple of families traveling together? I had no idea. And through about 5 years of further research, I was able to piece together who those individuals were. And they were indeed one family. There was a set of grandparents, a set of parents, and their 5 children. And the first book, Two Sacks, tells their story of not only how they came to America, but why they came to America. They ranged in age from 69 all the way down to 2 years of age. So my goal, I wanted to tell this story of family history, a plausible story of historic fiction that would tell why the family came, and it would tell about their journey and how it may have occurred. You see, I've got the journey starts over here, and in Switzerland. It goes downriver to Amsterdam on the Rhine River, and then they depart there in the early summer of 1803. They cross the Atlantic, they get into Philadelphia, and then they have to get on the Great Wagon Road and come right through the Shenandoah Valley. And their goal was to grow cotton. I don't know that for a fact, but cotton in the first decade of the 1800s was the Bitcoin of our times. It was what everybody was talking about. Everybody wanted to grow cotton. So I wrote into the book the story. They were pursuing the American dream. In their native Helvetic Republic, they were not allowed to own the land. They were peasants. And I'll show you how I figured that out. So this story, let me go back one. There we go. I missed a part of the story. When I found this list, all of my attention was on the column on your left-hand side. It was the passenger names. And then finally, after I got over that excitement, I went over to, there's a column, cabin or steerage. Steerage, if you're not familiar, is the bottom of the boat. You're down there with the rats, okay? And there were over 200 passengers on this boat, this brig named Commerce, which was about the size of a double-wide mobile home. 200 people. And the average crossing of the Atlantic was anywhere from 7 to 10 weeks. A lot of that is covered in the first book. But what really got my attention was that far right column over there. Quantity of baggage. And when I read down to what the Ishee family had for all 9 of them, what does it say there? 2 sacks. It literally took my breath away. I'm trying to think how anybody in our modern society could do anything with 2 sacks for 9 people. I mean, your shoes would take up 2 sacks, clothes. I mean, yeah. So I spent many a night laying awake at night, just what in the world would you put in 2 sacks? So I covered that in the first book, but that is the reason for the title, was 2 sacks. They came to America pursuing the American dream. So how do I tell this story? There's a lot of different ways to tell family history. One of the most popular ways is with a scrapbook. Literally, you open a book, it's got blank pages, you put in whatever data you have, whatever documents you have, some photographs maybe, you handwrite in things, it's just blank pages and you're just filling it up. The good thing about this is it's very low cost and it puts all the information in one volume. Another way you can tell the family story, and very few people do this, is an audio recording. You actually sit down with a cassette or a digital recorder and you tell those stories and put it in a format that you can pass along to the next generation. The third way is a documentary book. And I've got to hold up a great example here. I came to listen to Mr. Good's presentation, All in Good Time, and I was very impressed with the work he went into this book. He put into that book. It's got all of the family data, information. It's got birth dates, death dates, burial places, photographs. He weaves in some stories about what may have happened, but he makes it factual. It's all about the documents. And it is a very valuable book for someone to pass on to the next generation. This bookstore out here is absolutely full of documentary family history books, from the Bowmans to the Heatwells to the Garbers, to, I mean, you name it. So that's another way that I thought about writing my own family story. And then I thought about, and this was a new word for me, novella. I don't know what that was. I'll admit it. It's a short novel, usually less than 100 pages. It's longer than a short story, but shorter than a long story. Okay, that's one way to put it. I thought about that, And I kind of decided on that. Matter of fact, I did an outline to do a novella. And by the time I got done with the outline, I said, no, this isn't going to work. So the last way was the way that I decided to tell my family story was through a novel. What kind of novel? This set me out on a journey of how to write. Well, first of all, what is historical fiction? Anybody want to take that up? Can you give me a definition? Anybody in the audience want to volunteer? How would you define to a class of sixth graders historical fiction? Yep, I was the same way. I was thinking in my mind, historical fiction, if it's historical, that means it happened. But if it's fiction, it didn't happen. How can you have historical fiction? And my wife over there said, Jeff, look it up. Find out what historical fiction is. So I did. I looked up Merriam-Webster. And Merriam-Webster defines historical fiction as a novel set in a past period that typically includes historical figures and events. It is a work of fiction that is based on history and often involves an imaginative reconstruction of past events and people. Now I was starting to warm up to it. I said, I can tell a story. In my career, I've been involved with news journalism. You don't tell stories in news journalism. You tell the facts. You make it brief. You tell what happened, where it happened, how it happened, and maybe why it happened. But you move on. In radio, our time limit is generally 45 seconds to tell the story. Then you move on to the next one. So all of my career had been in short form journalism, and now this was opening up a whole new world to me. So again, I asked my wife, give me a good example of, what's historical fiction? First words out her mouth was Gone with the Wind. Duh. To Kill a Mockingbird. Probably the most famous novel, or not the most famous, my favorite, personal favorite, is The Caine Mutiny. It might have something to do that I was in the Navy. But The Caine Mutiny by Herman Wouk is an absolute amazing historical fiction novel. It puts you in the Pacific Ocean on a ship with a group of men. And anyway, The Great Gatsby and A Tale of Two Cities. So there were some good examples of historical fiction. Now I want to say I am in no way comparing my writing to Harper Lee, Margaret Mitchell, anybody like that. But those are some examples of historical fiction. I was learning all this because my career was spent in news journalism, completely different from what I was thinking about. And my goal was to use the format of historical fiction to tell a plausible story of how our family ancestors came to America. And that word plausible, I have really latched onto. It means a lot to me because I wanted to tell a story that was believable. What I set out to do, I intentionally left out all of the standard ingredients of a popular novel. You have a plot, you have rising action, you have a climax, you have protagonist, you have antagonist, supporting characters. I didn't want any of that. I just wanted to write a story, literally write a story. I did not want to create villains. I didn't want to create heroes. I didn't want any unnecessary drama, racy sex scenes, or crimes of passion, stuff that sells books. I wanted to tell a story that my grandkids could read and appreciate the story. That was my goal. And then I had to learn about something that we don't talk about in news journalism, but point of view. Don't give an opinion, Jeff. You're a news guy. But in the world of historical fiction, you can give all sorts of opinions. First person, you are a character in the book and you're telling the story. The word I, that's first person. Then there's third person limited. The narrator is outside the story, but focuses on the thoughts and feelings of only one character. That sounded better, but what really sounded good, third person omniscient. Don't you love that word? The narrator is an all-knowing observer who can access the thoughts of any character and provide external commentary. I said, that gives me free license to tell the story based on the facts, the plausible facts that I had learned through my research in family history. So it's not good manner to read a slide, but I'm going to stand back here and actually read this slide because this is the preface to essentially both of my books. And this is the point that I really wanted to make. Dear reader, I fully realize that I'm repeating my advice from the first book in this series, Two Sacks, One Family's Journey from Swiss Germany to America in 1803 to 1805. It is, however, worth repeating, in my opinion. The most important message I need to convey before you begin to read this book is found in the first two sentences of the next paragraph. This book, Magnolia Frontier, The Search for Land, Liberty, and Love, is a work of historical fiction. That is, fiction based on historical facts. The narrative within these pages is completely my own imagination. My intention is to tell the story of the Ishee brothers as they settled in the Mississippi Territory in the early 1800s. It may have happened this way, or it may not have happened at all like this. It's doubtful we'll ever know the real story. This is the primary reason for this novel. It is my attempt to tell a story, to weave a narrative based on the period of time, the customs in time, and the very few facts that we have learned. So I wanted to read that to you because, like my readers, I want them to understand why this book is being written. I wanted readers to understand the culture of the times. This was set during the first couple of decades of the 1800s. The place eventually was the Mississippi Territory. Now, they came through the Shenandoah Valley. I spent an entire chapter in the first book with them at the Augusta Stone Church in Fort Defiance. And so I took a lot of reality, wove it into the story as they traveled down the Great Wagon Road. And I wanted to read the readers to understand what was the Great Wagon Road like. People were walking. There were a few people that had horses and carriages, but probably at least half of the people, the tens of thousands of people that came down the Great Philadelphia Wagon Road, were on foot. I wanted people to understand the political and social issues. Jim Britt was on the radio with me the other day, and he asked me, Jeff, the first decade of the 1800s, wasn't that kind of a boring period? I said, are you kidding me, Jim? There was a lot going on. You ever hear the Louisiana Territory Purchase? The Louisiana Purchase? Thomas Jefferson did that without the approval of Congress. Quick story there. I'm sure most of you know this story. Thomas Jefferson sent a delegation to New Orleans. France owned New Orleans at that time. They literally owned it. And Jefferson knew that whoever controls New Orleans, the port, they control the Mississippi River. And whoever controls the Mississippi River will control all of North America. So he authorized a delegation to go down there and offer Napoleon Bonaparte $10 million to buy the city of New Orleans and a little bit of what they called West Florida. Long story short, this delegation met with the French delegation. They got with Napoleon. He came back to him and he said, tell you what, for $15 million, I'll sell you the whole territory. And so they, of course, communication during these times was very slow. You had to send a rider and a courier all the way to Washington. So it was several weeks in the making. But when they came back, they said, you got a deal. We'll give you $15 million. It's 530 million acres. 3 cents an acre for what now is 15 states of the United States of America. But he did it with nobody's approval. You think Trump is controversial? Thomas Jefferson, they thought Thomas Jefferson had gone over the deep end on this one. They said, you bought this wilderness out there for $15 million? Where are we going to get the money? He said, I don't know, but it's 3 cents an acre. And he was almost prosecuted for violating the instructions of Congress, but eventually it got through and we ended up owning the Louisiana Territory. So there were a lot of political and social issues. It was anything but boring. Now, of course, what was the big issue in the first half of the 1800s? Slavery. Slavery was the big issue. There were a lot of people for it. There were a lot of people against it. There was no in between. It was a huge, huge issue. I wanted them to understand the food, the dress, and the language of the times. When, for instance, when they passed through Amsterdam in 1803, what were they eating? So I researched that and found authentic foods and dress and language of the times. The bottom line, I wanted readers to understand what their ancestors' lives may have been like. Now I want to move over to the main part of my presentation. We'll be out of here by 9:30, right? Okay. I'm joking. I've got about another 15 minutes or so. There's a lot of ways. I chose the historical fiction novel because it was a challenge to me personally and professionally. I had never written anything long form in my life. And here I was attempting to write not only 300 pages about a topic that I was still researching, but it was about my own people. I can't get this wrong. You know, this is very important to a lot of people. So I chose that route, but there are several other routes that you can take. My sister gave me this journal a couple of years ago now. A lot of people have these journals. Basically, they're what we call a prompt journal. At the top of each page, there's a, fill in the blank, your birth dates, your marriage dates, military service. There's a place for, your education. There's a place for pictures. This is a great thing if you just want to compact everything with a kind of a guide to tell your family story. And thank you, Beverly, for giving me that. I know she's watching in Alabama. Then another way to tell the story is through what we see here in the bookstore at Rocktown History. Documented family histories. People have done research, they've written footnotes, they've gone to places, they have gotten the facts, and now they're gathering all the facts into a documentary book. I was unaware that I have a distant cousin named John Z. Ishee. I'm pretty sure that stands for Zachariah. I have talked to him one time. He lives in Texas, and he was like me. He was very interested in our family history. So somehow I got his phone number, and I called him one night, and we were chatting. He said, I've been doing a little work, spent 3 weeks over in Switzerland and then 2 weeks here. And, he's traveled all over the place to document these things. And he's put together this documented history of our family, the Ishee family history. And it is extremely well written. It's close to 100 pages long. I believe it has 15 pages of just footnotes. For instance, when he went to Switzerland, he went to the old hometown, which is about the size of Dayton, Rumisburg in Canton Bern, and he found the census from 1798, I believe that is. And these were all of the Ishees living in Rumisburg in 1798, told their ages, where they were born, and the interesting thing I found about this was their occupation. I did not know a landman is a peasant farmer. A decker is a roofer. Makes sense. A sin is a cheese maker. A wobber is a weaver. A hindereg is kind of like a hired hand. and a hert would be a herdsman or a cowboy. So this really gave a lot of information, and God bless you, John Z. Ishee, for documenting all this information. And then he went further and he put it into a timeline. Okay, here's where the family roots are in the 1600s. Here's where the family roots are in the 1700s. And it goes on page after page after page. You can follow. It is a story based on the facts. He never actually writes a story, but you can weave it all together. So thank you, John, wherever you are. Now, I have one thing to say about this. He told me on the phone call, he said, I'm going to email you a digital file of what I have done, this book, but it is copyrighted and I do not want it released to anybody. He said, I wrote this for my family. And I told him, I respect that. I praise you for sharing it with me, but I promise that I will never share that book with anyone without your permission. But the fault is, I think we all want our stories to be told, don't we? But I respect his decision. He wrote it for his family, and he said it's copyrighted, and please do not share this. So, just a little side story there. Another way, we talked about this earlier, a scrapbook. This is the scrapbook that started it all for me. This scrapbook was begun by my Aunt Sarah Kinslow Ishee sometime in the 1960s. She worked on it all the way up until the 1980s. And it is literally a scrapbook, just had blank pages. She would sit down at the typewriter and type out whatever information she had found, and she put it into this family scrapbook. She would include pictures, and now these pictures are priceless to me and to anyone in our family. And this particular page has a little bit of importance to me. That's my handwriting when I was 13 years old. I recognize my handwriting. My mother had cancer. She passed when I was 15, and this was when I was about 13 or 14. Aunt Sarah would take me downtown Montgomery to the Department of Archives, I think just to kind of get me out of the house and occupy my mind with something. And she did, and I really felt blessed looking back. I feel blessed that she got me started on this genealogical tree. She sat down and she says, okay, Jeff, you're going to fill out this form now. We're going to fill in the blanks. We're going to do it today on the information that we know. So we started off with my grandfather, Benjamin Franklin Ishee, and then who was his dad? Who was his mom? Who were their kids? And, this took a while to figure out all this information. She had already compiled a lot of that information, but I was just writing it down. She was training me to be the future family historian. Thank you, Aunt Sarah. This is a photograph in that same scrapbook of my great-grandfather and great-grandmother, John Jefferson Ishee and Martha Elizabeth Webb Ishee, and her line is very interesting too. I can tell a lot of stories about that. I was really surprised to find out one of her ancestors was a bodyguard for Colonel George Washington. That was my reaction. Of course, they didn't have the Secret Service when he was president, but they had a special company, a protective guard, they called it. And I looked it up, and there's his name. Yeah, so that's just cool little stories you learn about your family history. And other just priceless photographs. These are grandparents in another line of the family tree. And this brings me to probably one of the most valuable artifacts I have. And again, thank you, Beverly, for doing this for us. This is a scrapbook about my father. His name was J.Q. Ishee. First name was Joe. Middle name was Quitman. But she gave him a prompt journal with a daily diary. It was like notepad size. It wasn't large pages. But she said, every morning, Dad, when you sit down for breakfast, just answer the question at the top of this page. So it would be questions like, what are your early memories of your mother? You know, it would provoke some comments that this is not data, this is stories. This is where family history comes alive. So he would write that in his own handwriting. What characteristics did you inherit from your father? In what ways did you take after him? You know, physical, appearance, and so forth. So it was asking a lot of questions, and he answered them. And then my sister, after my father had passed away, she went back to this scrapbook and she transposed his handwriting into text so we could all read it. And this is one of my favorite stories. Dad bought a used 1924 Ford Model T. It cost $50 and was the first car my family ever owned. It was 4 years old when we bought it, and we kept it just a short time. Nobody knew how to drive it. So I never got to ride in it. James, who was his older brother, bought a 28 Chevy four-door about 3 years later, and he and I learned to drive with it. Our family took trips of 15 to 25 miles in it. One time we went to Lewin in it, but had 7 flat tires from Lewin to Bay Springs. Now, the distance from Lewin to Bay Springs in Mississippi is about 7 miles. So they were having a flat tire every mile. This is where family history comes alive. This is not statistics, okay? So thank you again, Beverly, for doing this. There's some great stories in here, and I'm not going to bore you with all of them, but what are your early memories of your father? So he talks about his father, his grandfather, who was a Baptist minister. He talks about all the kids. At the bottom, he talks about physical ailments, what age he died. He was living with his daughter, May, who lived in Panama City, Florida, and he is buried in Lewin, Mississippi. But this is all just great oral history. I have an old horse collar and harness that my horse wore when I was farming. I also have an old Seth Thomas clock that had stopped running years earlier, but Vera, that's his wife, my mom, Vera's mom and dad gave to me, and I had it fixed in 1960 for $1, and it still runs good to this day. And Carole and I still have the same clock. We still have it. I didn't know the story behind it. Now I do. This is a picture of my dad when he was in his 20s. I'm not sure which car this is, but my sister Beverly, when she put together this scrapbook, she went through just boxes and boxes of old photographs, and she would try to pair an appropriate photograph with the story that he was trying to tell, okay? And this, again, guys like to talk a lot about cars, didn't they? He bought a car. It was 3 years old. He paid $325. He kept it for 7 years, sold it for $450. He was a businessman. I want you to know that. It gave me many miles and good service. I owned it when Vera and I got married in 1943. We made many trips to Mississippi in it. During war times, gasoline and tires were rationed, but we kept it on the road somehow. And this is him. I'm going to guess that was about 1941 or 1942. He did serve in World War II in the U.S. Army. But again, priceless stories that you just can't get from a census form. So I'm going to suggest, if you want to take this route, there are several titles that I found on Amazon. These are very high-selling titles that if you want to do what we call a prompt journal, it might just be a wintertime project. You sit down with it at breakfast time like my dad did, and you write a couple of paragraphs. These are a couple of titles that I found on Amazon, and I'm sure you can also find them in local bookstores. A grandmother's journal, memories and keepsakes for my grandchild. Mom, I want to hear your story. A lifetime of memories. and then tell your life story. Those are just some ideas if you want to go that route of a prompt journal. Okay, and in closing, I want to leave you with this. Please don't let your family's history die with you. Pass along what you do know in whatever format you choose. It could be on a cassette tape, it could be in a blank scrapbook, it could be in a prompt journal. You could end up writing a historical fiction novel unintentionally, like I did. But these stories, like we just shared from my dad, they're absolutely priceless. I feel like I know him all over again. So, you know, and the grandkids who knew him briefly, they will feel like they will know him. That concludes my presentation. Not too bad, 45 minutes.
Actually, I spoke for a while, so you have more time.
Oh.
And I'm wondering if you would entertain some questions
Absolutely.
about your book.
Yes.
Like maybe what was the hardest or easiest or most favorite story? You have to repeat the question. Most favorite story that you wrote. You know, what
Oh boy. You know,
piece of the story?
sometimes when I go back and I reread the book, you know, after 2 years ago, I go, that was pretty heavy, Jeff. You know? Because, and I don't want to be a spoiler alert here, but you know, it says right on the cover of the second book, there were 9 family members that left Switzerland, what we now know as Switzerland. The family legend was that there were only 3 boys that made it to Mississippi. I had to weave that story together. I had to figure out what was a plausible scenario, and that was tough. That was very tough. I had to research the medical issues at that time, the most common causes of fatalities in 1803. Where are you going to go to research that? But I had to, there would be one page where I would have to just completely change my angle because all of a sudden an accident happened. A real life accident, a believable, plausible accident, and it took a little sister's life. And all the history books that I have read on that period indicate to me that life was like that. We have it so good here in the 21st century. I mean, they wouldn't even have a concept of what air conditioning was or water inside the house. What's that all about? You got water in the house? I mean, you just think about the little things, the food provisions, and the setting for the story at the end of the first book and for the entirety of the second book is in the wilderness of the Mississippi Territory. There was not a single road in what we now call Mississippi. There was an Indian path that went from a place called Fort St. Stephen's over to Natchez, over on the Mississippi River. And there was a network of Indian trails, but those Indian trails were no wider. You gotta think now, before the white man came, they didn't have horses. They didn't have cattle. So all of the Native American trails were narrow, but they were well worn because people did travel. The Native Americans traveled a lot. So I learned a lot. The coolest story that I can tell and that really got my attention, in the first book, when the 3 brothers are coming down the Great Wagon Road and they learn that they're going to have a passport to leave Georgia because Georgia was the border of the United States. When you got into that, when you got past the Georgia border on the Chattahoochee River, you were in the Choctaw Nation or the Creek Nation or the Cherokee Nation. And they literally, and I found actual passports from the early 1800s where they would issue these handwritten, very short form, John, Jacob, and Fred Ishee, whatever you spell it, have our authority to travel through the Choctaw Nation towards the town of Natchez on the Mississippi River. And if they didn't have that passport and they were approached by Native Americans, it could be a real problem. There were agreements that anybody who crossed the Chattahoochee River, I had no idea that you had to have a passport to leave the state of Georgia, but it made common sense. You were leaving the United States. So that was a cool little factoid that I dug up. Several little stories about the Atlantic crossing. That was a perilous journey. You think about, like I said, this brig Commerce, I don't have any drawings or obviously photographs of it, but the best we can tell, it was about 80 to 90 feet long and about 35, maybe 40 feet wide. And they had just over 200 passengers and a crew of 9. And they were all down in steerage. And the thought came to my mind, I'll never forget this. I was laying awake one night, wonder what the weather was like. Well, let's see, they left Amsterdam in June. That puts them right off the coast of Virginia about September. What happens off the coast, the East Coast, in September? So I said, wouldn't it be cool if I could find a real hurricane that was out there? And I did. You know, all the newspapers.com, you can do your research. I went back to the Norfolk newspaper in 1803, and during the final week of September of 1803, there was what they called the Great Norfolk Storm. Killed dozens of people, dozens of houses were shattered. It was a big calamity. The ship arrived in Philadelphia on October the 9th. So where would they have been the last week of September? In the worst possible place. So that's part of the first book, going through an actual hurricane. And I can say actual because it is documented. It happened. And we know that the ship followed a certain course and a certain timeline, and they were obviously in that hurricane. So I learned so much, and that's what I want my readers to do is say, oh, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. I can tell that story about my ancestors and, you know, to my grandkids. So questions, do you have any questions, please? Yep. Yes, ma'am.
As far as the process that you took to putting your pencil to paper, once you got started writing, did you run into any obstacles as far as getting what was in your head out onto paper?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll repeat it for the folks. Did I have any problem when I came to actually writing the story, you know, making the transition from chapter to chapter and from event to event? No. The reason is because I'm a very organized, meticulous person when it comes to my writing. So long before I started writing the actual manuscript, I was writing an outline, I was writing chapter notes, I was writing events and dates. Okay, Fred is 8 years old and he turns 9 on April the 3rd. You know, I had all this 3 or 4 pages of facts, and then I would sit down and the story was kind of weaving itself almost. And I was using my imagination, of course, but it was only to make those facts as accurate as I could and plausible. So that's a great question. I can't imagine just sitting down in front of a monitor and saying, okay, this is chapter 1. What's going to happen here? But, you know, so I had worked over these outlines and these drafts for several months. The first book took about 9 to 10 months to write that one. And then the second book was a little bit shorter. It was probably 7 or 8 months. If you'd love to do research, and I do, it was a real thrill. Yes, sir.
You kind of half answered my question, was the difference between the first and the second book. As you're writing, did you notice, was it easier to do the second book because you'd already done the first one? Was it harder?
Yes, it was easier for me to continue the story. I didn't have to create as much as I did with the first one. With the first one, you saw the map of the journey. You know, I literally went through my mind, okay, chapter 1, first of all, they got to make a decision to leave. Chapter 2, they've got to go down the Rhine River to get to Amsterdam. Chapter 3, they've got to go from Amsterdam to, it's the voyage. Chapter 4, and so that was my sequence. I was doing a literal timeline based on that journey. Now, the challenge with the second book, it was easier to write because I didn't have to be as creative, but now they've reached their goal. But it's in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing out there. And we were talking about this before the presentation tonight. The place that they eventually settled is called Monticello, Mississippi. It wasn't a town. It was one of the very first communities along the Choctaw trading path that formed, because that's where the Choctaw trading path crossed the Pearl River, which was kind of like a miniature Mississippi River. So people were, settlers were starting to cluster in this, and they, to this day, they pronounce it Monticello, not Monticello. Don't say that down there. That's in Virginia, boy. So that was a lot of fun doing that. And the second book did come more naturally. And of course, I am considering a third book now that I've gotten the story started, and really because of the encouragement of the readers. I had numerous people contact me. Quick story, and this will be my last story. Okay. In the first book, there's a chapter where they're journeying by foot, the family, from Philadelphia through Lancaster, Pennsylvania, down through Winchester, Harrisonburg, right on down the Valley Pike. But one of the boys is sold into what we call redemptioner status. And that was to pay for, long story short, that was to pay for the passage of his family. John, the oldest son, who was about 18, maybe 19, he was sold into redemptioner status at a place called New Holland, Pennsylvania. And there was a grist mill there owned by the Rhine brothers, R-I-N-E or R-E-I-N, George and John Rhine. These were real people. It was a real mill. The foundation to the mill is still there if you go today. And I have documented evidence that John worked at that mill. After the first book comes out, I get an email one night. And this fellow's name, his last name is Ryan. He said, "You're not going to believe this, sir, but I was just reading your novel, and my great-great-grandfather is in your novel." George Ryan in New Holland, Pennsylvania. He said, "Yeah." He said he almost fell out of his chair, but that's what I wanted to do, was to take actual characters and not inflect on them a personality or anything that might damage their reputation or anything like that. But if I knew the facts about a real person, I could weave them into the story. And when that guy reached out, that's been about 2 years ago now, I just thought that was the funniest thing. I said, I wrote about this guy just on a hunch, and now his great-great-grandson contacts me. So it is a small world, and that's one of the benefits of having done a project like this is I've made a lot of new friends.
So my second half of my question was, did you ever feel like there was some kind of presence behind you, kind of helping pushing you to do more?
A ghost?
Not necessarily a ghost, maybe, but like a spirit of something that was helping you along.
Yeah, and I dedicated the first book to her, my Aunt Sarah. She was the spirit that was behind the first book and now the series. She took me as a young man, I was 13 or 14, and really probably just to get my mind off of what was going on at home, she introduced me to something that I have become passionate about in my lifetime. So that spirit is my Aunt Sarah. Good question.
Oh, that's lovely. So I just wanted to quickly ask, in terms of, you mentioned personalities, if you were writing about these people and you're traveling with these people, did you have people in mind for what Barbara was like? Did you build up like character? Did you have family dynamics?
And that's an intentional no. And I was kind of critiqued on the first novel by saying not enough character development. I agree. That was intentional because I didn't want to get into the weeds. As I mentioned on the slide, I didn't want any unnecessary drama. I didn't want anybody from one branch of the family looking back saying, well, he was just a scoundrel, wasn't he? I didn't want that. So I tried not to go too far into character development. I wanted you to know who they were, but almost more importantly is I wanted you to know how they lived and the challenges that they probably had to face.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, let's give a big
Thank
round
you
of
all.
applause.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You just checked all the Rocktown history boxes.
Oh,
You
there's
know,
one you just reminded me.
genealogy,
I want to
history.
encourage everybody when you're Christmas shopping, they have gift certificates here. Do you know that? $25, $50, whatever you want to spend. Yeah, what a great gift. I'd go wild in this bookstore.
Great guest. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and we hope to see you for one of the upcoming events, or just also wish you a very happy holiday season and safe travels heading home. Thank you, everybody.